Hi there, I'm digital anchor Brandy Smith. This week, the University of Houston announced that a team of its researchers has come up with a COVID-19 vaccine administered nasally. I talked to Dr. Navin Varadarajan, who led this effort, about how the vaccine works, how they came up with it, and what comes next. How would a nasal vaccine work to protect people against COVID-19?
I think hopefully vast majority of people that have gotten the vaccine right here in the United States have gotten intramuscular vaccines. And so they give you protection systemically, which means throughout your body, except for a few blind spots. And unfortunately, it so happens that because COVID is a respiratory virus, it comes in through the nostril. And one of the blind spots for systemic vaccines is the upper airways or the nostrils. And so for this reason, you would be able to see things in the news like people who have gotten vaccinated still can get infected, right? They just don't end up in a hospital, which is, all credit to Moderna and Pfizer and J&J. They have made vaccines that save people's lives and make sure that they don't end up in a hospital or worse, die. But because the way of administering the vaccine has a blind spot, which leaves the nostril vulnerable to infection. So vaccinated people have these breakthrough infections and they can still spread the virus to other people. The difference is when you do a nasal vaccine, you're trying to elicit immunity. Your body is not defenseless. So people who naturally get infected with COVID and thankfully recover, when they get an immune response, they cover everything. They cover the systemic immunity, but they also have what is known as mucosal immunity. So it also protects your upper airways and your nostrils so that your body's primed and ready to go. So the nasal vaccine, in some sense, replicates natural infection. So it wants to give you protection both in the nostrils, but also systemic immunity, right? So it's not like it only gives you protection in the airways, but does nothing for systemic. It gives you both without having to compromise the blind spot of intramuscular vaccines.
It kind of sounds like that a first line of defense almost.
Exactly. And that's the easiest way to think about it, right? Stop the virus before it even gets to the lung and it starts to do damage.
How did you guys come up with this idea and move forward with it?
So my lab actually thinks about immunology and cancer immunotherapy primarily, and we've been working on it for 10 years. But before I came here, I was actually looking at vaccine-induced responses in the context of HIV. And there, because it's a bloodborne or a sexually transmitted disease, the importance of mucosal immunity, this other arm of immunity, is very well understood and appreciated. So when I saw this, I immediately said, why don't we try something through that also elicits mucosal immunities, exactly like you said, that prevents it right at the doorstep, right? And not just systemic immunity. And so we said, for respiratory viruses, obviously that has to be something that's inhalation. So that's how we came up with an inhaled vaccine.
Most people are familiar with, like the flu vaccine, taking that nasally. How does this work? Like for someone who doesn't know anything about it, how does this differ from the shot in our body's response?
In our body's response, right? I'm glad you mentioned FluMist, right? So FluMist is the simple example that everybody understands about vaccines being administered nasally. And so it's very similar. You have a spray that's administered through the nostrils, and then it primes immunity locally, right? Gives you this mucosal immunity that protects your nostrils, but also gives you full body protection, right? So it works very similar to a shot in that it gives you immunity all over, but it just does not leave particular spots vulnerable like the nostrils and all your mucosal surfaces.
One of the questions I had as I was reading up on this, does this vaccine use live virus or is it another method?
So I think that's one of the primary advantages that we have. So, if you step back and ask the question, if intranasal vaccines give you both, why isn't everybody just giving intranasal vaccines, right? So one of the things, the J&J vaccine, for example, is a virally vectored vaccine. It means that they took a virus shell and then they put the protein for the coronavirus on top of it. And that's their vaccine construct, right? Pfizer and Moderna just give you nucleic acids. The nucleic acids will make protein in your body, and that's the vaccine. So Pfizer and Moderna have no viruses. J&J has a virus. It's not the COVID, but it's a different one on which you can think of it as a shell on which the proteins of the coronavirus have been decorated. In our case, we're just administering protein, so no viral components of any sort. So we're taking the spike protein, which is on the surface of the coronavirus, that's essential for facilitating entry of the virus into human cells, and we're immunizing with that.
One of the other things I was reading up on is how much more available a vaccine, a nasal spray would be versus one of the shots, which has to be kept under very, very difficult to maintain conditions. So is your hope with this to get it out to more people and to some of the harder hit areas where they just don't have access to, for example, the super cold freezers?
Right. I think that you absolutely nailed one of the big advantages that we've been focusing on right from the get-go, right? That, yeah, ultra cold freezers are available at hospital, and thankfully at places like Houston with an amazing Texas Medical Center, you have access to these facilities. But we've thought of our vaccine as something that needs to be stable with at most simple refrigeration. Maybe a refrigerator is one thing we can ask for, but nothing more than that, nothing colder than a standard household refrigerator. And so we've shown, for example, that the components of our vaccine are stable with refrigeration up to a year. And then we're figuring out a way to just mix on demand and then administer. So we absolutely have an eye on the distribution piece as well, right? We want to make a vaccine that can be disseminated essentially worldwide with minimal refrigeration.
Where are you guys in the process of like FDA approval?
So I think this is where I branch off from being just a faculty member and an academic person at an educational institution, and it goes into the role of trying to commercialize this. So I co-founded a startup company whose mission is to bring this to humans. And so that company has now licensed the technology from the University of Houston, and they're going to work with the FDA to try and set up human trials to do safety testing. Obviously, we have to do all three phases of clinical trials, right? Safety testing, and then show efficacy before getting commercial approval. So the company will take over from here because a lot of it is, related to manufacturing, working with the FDA kind of stuff. It's not just sciencey stuff, which is what universities and academics like to do.
Gotcha. Do you have a timeline on that, or a hopeful timeline, I should ask?
I think the hopeful timeline is the company should start human testing with phase 1 trials at the end of this second quarter of 2022. Right? They should be ready to go, right? And start testing in humans, let's say June, July next year, right? And if they're successful in phase 1, which hopefully they will, right? Then you go on and do phase 2 and phase 3. So I think it's also a dynamic and a complex, evolving world. It's hard to predict what COVID's going to look like and what variants will be present in 9 months' time. So there's also a multitude of factors, and how well the current vaccines continue to work, how many people have gotten booster shots. So it becomes a question vaccinology, but I think that's the aspirational timeline, right? That we want to be in humans second quarter of 2022.
Got it. What do you want people to take away from this news when they see the headline that U of H researchers have developed a vaccine candidate that can be taken nasally? What do you want them to think about or consider? Ideally, ease of administration, right? This is something that I feel comfortable taking. This is something, I have kids, certainly I would be comfortable giving to my kids, don't have to have needles.
And I think there's two steps, right? Again, there's the what we can accomplish, and there's also the aspirational goal. Where eventually I want to go with this is thinking about vaccines that can be self-administered, right? As opposed to a registered health professional who administers vaccines. Now, if we make it into a nasal spray and we show it works, do we want to work towards self-administration? We send people vaccines to their home. Because the worst thing in the pandemic is to have 30,000 people lining up to get a vaccine, right? It seems like you want to spread the virus before you get the vaccine. So long-term vision would absolutely be this concept of, send something and people administer themselves, or maybe a school nurse in a school setting, simpler distribution, just this concept of, maybe you were hesitant with the first generation of vaccines, but you should still get them, no question. Everybody should get the vaccines we have. But the simplest concept would be, here's a vaccine that's easy to administer. People with needle phobia, people who are worried about their kids, simple to administer, stable vaccine that can reach more people easily.
And anecdotally, I know a whole lot more people who are comfortable taking the flu mist than they are getting the flu shot. So it's just, some people are more comfortable with needles than others are.
Right. And even from an immunological or scientific perspective, if it makes more sense to give it intranasally because you engage more of the immune system, it seems like if you can have the advantages of both worlds, why not?
Exactly. Was there anything else that you wanted to add that I didn't ask about?
No, I think in general, being in Houston is amazing, right? I get the chance to collaborate with people here on campus. So this was an effort that, we started in April 2020. And nobody wanted to come to work, and my postdocs jumped at the opportunity to build a vaccine, even though we never. So it's just the concept that, we live in an amazing community of researchers, whether it's on campus and I can find collaborators here, or even within the Texas Medical Center. We collaborated with a faculty member at MD Anderson. So I think, to me, it's again a reflection of being in a city where people want to work together.
So you guys started working on this in April 2020?
The funny thing is, most of the work was done August 2020. So we published it as a preprint, which means it was not peer reviewed. So most of the results were available August 2020. And then just scientific publishing took us a year.
Gotcha.
Right? It's the unfortunate quirks of scientific publishing. So in the interim year, it's not like we sat on and did nothing. So this paper that just came out that they're referencing has the spike protein from the original Wuhan strain, but now with the Delta strain and the Gamma and the Beta. So we have an updated vaccine, which we haven't published yet, that will target all of these different strains. So that's what we've been working on, and that should hopefully be done in the next 3 months. And we'll officially publish that as well. So we've updated the formulation as well to reflect the evolution of the virus. And so, the unfortunate timeline of a year for scientific publishing.
Again, that was Dr. Navin Varadarajan. He is the MD Anderson Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Houston. You can read more about his research at khou.com.